Every Sunday afternoon, Pamela Russell sat by the phone. It was a routine that gave shape to her week, a small comfort in a quiet house filled with memories. At 77, living alone in Spokane, Washington, those weekly calls from her daughter Tanya were brief, but they meant more to her than she let on. Before we get into today's story, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories that celebrate the strength and wisdom of women like you. Tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Have you ever discovered the truth when someone didn't know you were listening? Share your experience in the comments. How did you handle the pain of being let down by someone you trusted? At 77, Pamela moved a little slower. Her hands weren't as steady as they used to be, especially in the mornings, but she had her garden, her watercolors, and her little gray cat, Myrtle, who always curled beside her chair when the phone rang. That Sunday, like every Sunday, she made sure the kitchen was tidy. She folded the throw blanket on the couch, made a fresh cup of tea, and placed the cordless phone on the table by the window. She liked to sit where the light hit her, African violets just right. She wore a soft cardigan and a gentle hope that today's conversation with Tanya might feel different, maybe warmer, maybe longer. At exactly 4:03 p.m., the phone rang. Pamela's heart lifted a little. "Hello, sweetheart," she answered, her voice soft but steady. "Hi, Mom. Sorry I'm a bit late. I've been running around all day," Tanya replied. She sounded distracted, like always. Papers shuffled in the background. A keyboard clicked. Someone called out something faintly behind her. Pamela smiled anyway. "That's all right. I'm glad you called." "How have you been?" Tanya asked, but the question landed more like a formality than real interest. "Oh, I've been fine," Pamela said. "It's been warm here. The tulips are coming in early this year. The red ones I planted last fall are finally blooming. They brighten up the whole yard." Tanya made a small sound. "That's nice. Sounds pretty." "They are," Pamela said. "I wish you could see them." There was a pause, then Tanya said, "Maybe sometime soon. We've just been swamped. The kids have track meets, and Vince has been on double shifts." Pamela nodded, even though no one could see her. She'd stopped asking for visits a while ago. It always seemed to make Tanya uncomfortable. "Well, I've kept busy," Pamela continued. "I've been painting again. Started a landscape of the old bridge near the park. You remember the one we used to walk over when you were little?" "Oh yeah, that one. Nice." Pamela heard more typing. Her daughter was multitasking again. She tried not to feel it, but the distance hurt. Not just the physical space between them, but the way the words never went deeper than surface level. Tanya didn't ask about her health, or if she was eating well, or if she ever felt lonely. Pamela didn't volunteer those things either. What would be the point? "How are the kids?" she asked. "Oh, busy. Hunter's got a science project on volcanoes, and Lacey's trying out for cheer. They're keeping me on my toes." Pamela chuckled lightly. "They sound full of life." "They are. They're good kids. Just a lot to juggle. "Yes," Pamela said. "I remember." There was another pause. Pamela glanced out the window. A neighbor pushed a stroller down the sidewalk. The breeze moved the tulip stems just so, and the petals danced a little. Myrtle shifted in her spot on the windowsill, stretching lazily. After about 15 more minutes of talk about the kids, work stress, and how the grocery store was out of oat milk again, Tanya said, "Well, I should get going. Vince wants me to help him with something before dinner." "Of course," Pamela said. "Same time next week." "Yeah, same time." "Take care of yourself, okay?" "I will. Love you." "Love you too." The line clicked. Pamela sat still for a moment, holding the phone in her hand. It was warm from her grip. She looked around the living room, the same one where Tanya had once opened birthday gifts with sticky fingers and wide eyes. The same room where Leonard used to hum while folding laundry. The quiet now felt bigger. She placed the phone back in its cradle and stood slowly. Her knees popped a little, but she didn't mind. She walked to the kitchen and poured the last of her tea down the drain. The sun was beginning to dip low in the sky, casting long lines of light through the back window. She went to the sunroom where her easel stood, facing a half-finished painting of the Riverwalk Bridge. Her brush sat in a jar of water, waiting. The paints were still soft. She picked up the brush, hesitated, then sat down. Sometimes she imagined what it might feel like to hear her daughter say, "I miss you, Mom," or, "Can I come over and just sit with you?" But instead, she painted, quietly, softly, and waited for next Sunday. Pamela placed the phone back in its cradle and stood up, reaching for her teacup. But just as she turned toward the sink, she heard something. Voices, faint but still there. She leaned closer to the phone. The line hadn't disconnected. She blinked, unsure if she was imagining it. But no, it was still live. She could clearly hear Tanya's voice in the background. "She totally bought it," Tanya said, laughing. Every word. Pamela's hand froze in midair. "You think she suspects anything?" It was Vince. Calm, casual, like they were talking about the weather. Number. "She's still hanging on to that old house, and her paint's like they're all she's got," Tanya said. "She's just stuck." Then came another voice. Lacey, her 16-year-old granddaughter. "Are we still doing the plan?" Lacey asked. "Yeah," Tanya replied. "We've got to ease her into it. The lawyer said if we push too hard, she might back off. But if we keep playing nice, she'll agree. It's just a matter of time." Pamela's chest tightened. She crouched down slowly into the kitchen chair, heart pounding in her ears. "I don't get why she's being so stubborn," Vince said. "It's not like she even needs that big house. Assisted living would be better for her. Cleaner, safer, less to manage. And once she's out," Tanya added, "we can finally put the place on the market. That neighborhood is booming right now. We're talking real money." Pamela's mouth went dry. She gripped the edge of the table with both hands. "She still thinks we care about her garden club and those dusty paintings," Tanya went on. "I've listened to her talk about that bridge painting 3 weeks in a row now. She's lonely," Vince said. "That makes it easier." Then came laughter. "Lacey again. She really is clueless. Grandma's sweet, but she's kind of gullible." Pamela stared out the window. Her tulips, bright and open just an hour ago, now seemed to blur in her vision. She reached for the phone to hang up, but she couldn't. Not yet. Her heart wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding, that maybe they were joking or being dramatic. But the call didn't sound like a joke. It sounded real, cold, planned. Hunter's voice chimed in now, softer but sharp. "When do we get to look at the house again? I want that big room in the back. We'll take her next weekend to look at the assisted living place near Rockwell," Tanya said. "Just act like it's casual, like we're concerned for her safety. Say we love her, that we just want her to be comfortable." Pamela sat perfectly still. She remembered that place, Rockwell Pines. She'd driven past it before. The building looked clean, but it was tiny. No garden. No space for her paints. No light-filled windows. It looked like a holding spot, not a home. "Let's just make sure she doesn't talk to anyone about this," Vince said. "If she runs her mouth to one of her old friends, this whole thing could get complicated." Pamela reached for the phone and slowly, quietly pressed the red button. The line clicked off. The silence that followed was the loudest sound she'd ever heard. She sat there for what felt like a full minute, staring at nothing, her mind running in circles. Gullible, clueless, stubborn. They were talking about her like she wasn't real, like she didn't have memories, thoughts, or feelings, like she didn't matter. She looked around her kitchen, the framed photo of her and Leonard at the state fair, her favorite spoon rest shaped like a rooster, the blue curtains she had sewn herself back in the 80s. It wasn't much, but it was hers, her home, her life, and now her own family was trying to take it from her. She stood up slowly and walked over to the living room. Her knees felt weak, her breath short. She sat down again, this time on the couch, and rested her hands on her lap. The air in the room felt different now, heavier. Her eyes landed on a photo of Tanya as a little girl, hugging her favorite stuffed rabbit. That photo used to make Pamela smile. Now she just felt empty. This wasn't something she could chalk up to stress or misunderstanding. It wasn't a rough week or a misstep. They had sat together, her daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren, and planned to move her out, sell her home, and call it love. Pamela wiped her eyes. She hadn't even realized she was crying. It wasn't just the money or the house. It was the way they saw her, as a burden, an obstacle, something to move out of the way. The same woman who had raised Tanya on her own after Leonard passed. The woman who watched the kids every summer, who mailed birthday cards with handwritten letters and took calls at any hour of the night when Tanya needed someone. And yet, behind her back, they called her gullible. Pamela stood up again, this time with purpose. She walked to the hall closet and pulled out a small storage bin filled with paperwork, bank statements, property deed, power of attorney forms, all the documents she had trusted Tanya to help her manage. Trusted. That trust had been broken. She didn't know what her next step would be, not yet, but something inside her had shifted, something important. She wouldn't be pushed, she wouldn't be talked into anything, and she wouldn't pretend she hadn't heard what she heard. Whatever happened next, she would be the one making the decisions, and she'd make sure they knew that. Pamela sat at the kitchen table with a yellow notepad in front of her. The air felt different, quieter, heavier. She kept looking at the phone, half expecting it to ring, but she didn't want to answer it now, even if it did. Her hand moved slowly across the paper. She wasn't much of a list maker, but right now, she needed to see things clearly. She started writing down all the times over the last few years that made her stomach twist now that she really thought about them. March 2020 gave $10,000 for a broken water heater. She remembered that clearly. Tanya had called in a panic, said their heater had burst and ruined part of the basement. Pamela didn't even hesitate. She wrote the check the same day and mailed it first thing the next morning. A week later, she saw the pictures: sun-soaked beaches, fancy dinners, matching swimsuits on the kids. Tanya had posted them online with the caption, "Family time we desperately needed." Pamela had stared at the photos, confused. No one mentioned a trip. When she asked about the basement repair a few weeks later, Tanya brushed it off and said, "Oh, Vince's uncle ended up fixing it for free." Pamela had nodded back then. She didn't press, but now the memory stung. It didn't feel like a misunderstanding anymore. It felt like a lie. She added another note to her list. July 2021. Paid Hunters summer camp fees. Didn't get a thank you. And another. December 2022. Tanya said they were behind on the mortgage. Sent $3,500. Pamela set the pen down and leaned back. Her chest ached. These weren't just small slips. These were pieces of herself, her savings, her trust, her love, given freely and without question. And what had she gotten in return? Fewer visits, less warmth, conversations that always led to money. And now, a hidden plan to move her out of her own home. Her eyes scanned the living room from where she sat, the armchair Leonard used to fall asleep in after dinner, the Afghan she'd knitted during chemo treatments, the photo of all of them around the Christmas tree 10 years ago, before the kids were teenagers, when laughter came easier. That night had felt perfect back then. They'd all stayed over. The kids helped make sugar cookies, and Vince strung lights on the porch. Tanya had put her head on Pamela's shoulder while they watched old holiday movies. Now Pamela couldn't look at the photo the same way. She still loved them. How could she not? But there was a bruise now, deep and spreading. A part of her wanted to tear that photo off the wall. Another part wanted to wrap it up and put it in a box so it wouldn't keep staring at her. She picked up the pen again and wrote, "They don't see me as a person anymore, just someone in the way." The thought made her eyes well up. She wiped them with her sleeve and tried to breathe steady. This wasn't the first time she'd felt dismissed, but it was the first time it felt deliberate. Tanya had started talking about downsizing 2 years ago, always casually, always with a smile. Mom, don't you think this place is too much for you now? Or, there's a lovely senior apartment complex near us. They even have bingo nights. Pamela had always brushed it off. She loved her home, her garden, her freedom. But the suggestions never stopped. At first, they came every few months. Then it became monthly, then more often. She thought they were just concerned. Now she knew better. She stood up and walked slowly toward the back door. The garden was blooming. Tulips, daffodils, some early lilacs by the fence. Leonard had planted the lilac bushes. Every spring they filled the yard with that soft, sweet scent she loved. She stepped outside and sat on the little wooden bench Leonard had built. The wood was worn smooth from years of use. She ran her hand over it and closed her eyes. "I miss you," she whispered, imagining Leonard sitting beside her. "I don't know what to do." She stayed out there for a long time, thinking, not just about the betrayal, but what it meant, what it said about her place in the world now. It felt like everything she thought was solid had started to shift under her feet. But under the sorrow, under the anger, there was something else, a steady voice inside her, one she hadn't listened to in a long time. "You don't deserve this. You've given enough. You're still here, and you still matter." She looked around the yard, at the plants she'd nurtured for years, and suddenly felt a pull in her chest. Not sadness, something stronger. She wasn't sure what the next step was, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to sit quietly and let her life be decided for her. Whatever they thought about her, they were wrong. She wasn't weak. She wasn't clueless. And she wasn't done yet. Pamela sat in her bedroom, with the cordless phone resting in her lap. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the buttons. She had already made the decision, but carrying it out was harder than she thought it would be. She took a breath and opened the call log. Tanya, Vince, Lacey, Hunter. One by one, she blocked their numbers. Her hand shook slightly, but her heart didn't waver. For the first time in a long while, Pamela felt like she was taking her life back. After that, she dug through her file cabinet and pulled out the folder marked Banking. She had always kept things organized, mostly out of habit. Leonard used to call her his little bookkeeper. That memory made her smile a little. She called the bank and asked to speak to someone in person. The young man who answered offered to help her over the phone, but she politely said no. She needed to sit across from someone, look them in the eye, ask questions. Later that week, she walked into the bank wearing her best blouse and a sensible pair of flats. She carried a small notebook in her purse, along with every document she thought might be important. The woman who helped her was named Erica, maybe in her 30s, kind eyes, no rush in her voice. "I need to remove my daughter and son-in-law from all joint accounts," Pamela said simply. "They no longer have my permission to access anything tied to my finances." Erica blinked, surprised. "Of course. Are you okay?" Pamela nodded. "I will be." She signed form after form, canceled old cards, requested new ones, set up fresh passwords. It took over an hour, but when she walked out of that bank, she felt lighter, stronger. Back home, she opened the desk drawer and pulled out her will. It was 10 years old and still listed Tanya as her power of attorney. That would have to change. She circled her name with a red pen. Later that day, she went outside to water the garden, but her mind was still racing. She hadn't told anyone what she heard yet. Not even Willa, the woman next door, who checked on her every now and then. That evening, after dinner, she saw Willa sitting on her front porch with a glass of iced tea and a magazine. Pamela walked over and asked if she had a minute to talk. Willa was in her late 60s, tall, practical, always wore tennis shoes and a ponytail. She used to be a nurse before she retired, and Pamela had always trusted her advice. They sat on the porch steps as the sun went down. "I overheard something I wasn't supposed to," Pamela said. "It was about me, and it wasn't good." Willa listened without interrupting, as Pamela explained everything. How Tanya had forgotten to hang up, what she'd said, the plans they were making. By the end of it, Willa let out a slow breath. "I'm sorry, Pam. That's awful. But I'm glad you found out." "I feel like a fool," Pamela said. "You're not," Willa replied. "You're just someone who trusted too much. It happens to more people than you'd think." Pamela stared at her hands. "I don't know what I'm doing next. I've taken care of the bank stuff, but I don't know who to talk to about the will, or how to keep myself safe." Willa reached into her bag and pulled out a little notepad. She wrote down a name and phone number. "Her name is Naomi Huxley. She's a financial advisor, works mostly with older women who've been in situations like this. My cousin used her after her son started draining her savings. Naomi doesn't sugarcoat things, but she's smart and she'll fight for you." Pamela took the slip of paper and tucked it into her pocket. "Thank you," she said. "Really." "Start a journal too," Willa added. "Write down every time they asked for money, every call, every visit that felt off. It helps later on if you need to show a pattern." Pamela started that journal the same night. She pulled out a clean notebook from her desk drawer and wrote the date at the top of the first page. Then she went back, month by month, memory by memory. There was the time Vince came by just to visit, but asked if she'd co-sign on a loan. The time Lacey left with her grandmother's bracelet after a visit and never returned it. The weekend Tanya said she was coming over but canceled last minute, only to post photos from a concert 2 hours away. It was all there now, in black and white. Each entry made Pamela's chest ache, but it also helped clear the fog. She had doubted herself for too long, wondered if she was imagining things. Writing it down helped her see the truth. The next morning, she called Naomi's office and set up an appointment. The receptionist said she could see her next Wednesday at 10. Pamela circled the date on her calendar. She didn't know what the meeting would bring, but she felt ready, not just to protect what was hers, but to take her life back, one small step at a time. Pamela's phone lit up every morning that week. Unknown numbers, voicemails, texts. She didn't answer. She already knew who it was. The voicemails started off calm. "Hi, Mom, it's me. Just wondering why your number's not going through. Hope everything's okay. Call me back when you can." Then they got more pointed. "I don't know what's going on, but ignoring your family isn't the answer. We're worried about you." By the end of the week, Tanya's tone had changed completely. "You can't just shut us out. After all we've done for you, we're trying to help, and you're acting like a stranger. You're being cruel." Pamela deleted the messages without replying. She'd blocked their main numbers, but they found ways around it. Different phones, different area codes, even text messages from Lacey and Hunter, pretending like nothing was wrong. "Hey, Grandma, can you help me figure out this FAFSA thing?" "Hi, Grandma, I saw a cute sweater I think you'd love. Should I get it for you?" One afternoon, her doorbell rang. She froze for a second before peeking through the side window. Vince. He stood there like nothing had happened. No flowers, no apology, just a casual stance with his hands in his pockets. She didn't open the door. After a minute, he called out, "Pamela, I just want to talk. You don't have to be like this. We're all on the same team here." She stayed quiet behind the curtain until he left. Her heart was pounding. She hated that it still affected her that way, but it was hard. These were people she once trusted with everything. People she'd cooked for, celebrated birthdays with, held during hard times. Now they were knocking on her door, acting like she was the problem. A few days later, her grandson Hunter sent a message that hit her like a punch to the chest. "Do you not love us anymore?" She stared at the screen, her eyes wet. She wanted to scream, "Of course I love you," but she couldn't say that without opening the door again to what they'd done. And she wasn't ready to do that. Maybe not ever. She put the phone down and went outside to the garden. Pulling weeds helped her think. She dug her fingers into the dirt, yanking out roots that didn't belong. It felt good, in a strange way, doing something with her hands that made things better instead of worse. But the pain stayed. It crept into her sleep. She'd wake up feeling heavy and unsure, questioning herself, wondering if maybe she was being too harsh. Maybe they hadn't meant it the way it sounded. Maybe she was blowing things out of proportion. That back and forth in her mind wore her down. So she did something she hadn't done before. She walked down to the senior center on Tuesday morning and asked if there was anyone to talk to, someone who could help her sort things out. The woman at the front desk smiled kindly. "We have group meetings and one-on-one counseling. We can get you in with someone by Thursday if you'd like." Pamela nodded. She didn't need advice. She just needed someone to hear her out who wasn't trying to take something from her. On Thursday, she met with a therapist named Jean. Older, soft-spoken, glasses perched on her nose. She didn't push, just listened. Pamela told her about the overheard phone call, about the money, the silence, the sudden pressure, the guilt. She even mentioned the text from Hunter. Jean nodded slowly. "That's not love. That's control wrapped in guilt." Pamela sat back in the chair. That sentence hung in the air. She hadn't put it into those words before. But it was exactly right. Jean said something else that stayed with her. "You are allowed to say no, even to family, especially to family who try to take more than they give." Pamela didn't cry in the session, but she cried that night. Not out of weakness, but from finally letting go of the idea that she owed them everything. She thought love meant always saying yes, always showing up, always giving. But now she saw the difference between love and sacrifice. She kept going to therapy once a week, quietly, privately. No one else knew. It became her space to breathe, to speak honestly, to untangle the tight knot in her chest. And each time she left the senior center, she felt a little stronger. She started saying simple things out loud when she got home. "This is my house. I don't have to answer to anyone. I didn't deserve what they did." And after saying it enough, she started to believe it. The calls kept coming, but she stopped flinching when the phone buzzed. She stopped explaining herself to people who didn't care to listen. And in the middle of all the noise, she started to hear something else. Her own voice. Pamela stood outside the door to the art room at the senior center, clutching her canvas tote. Her hands felt clammy. It had been years since she'd painted around other people. She almost turned around, but something inside her said, "Just try." She pushed the door open and stepped in. The room smelled like paper and paint. A long table ran down the center, covered in cups of water, brushes, and trays of colors. There were about a dozen people inside, mostly women around her age, chatting softly as they worked on their pieces. A woman with short white curls and bright pink glasses looked up and smiled. "First time," Pamela nodded. "Yes, I'm Pamela." "Darlene," the woman replied. "Grab a chair, sweetheart. We don't bite." Pamela sat across from her and pulled out her supplies. She hadn't painted much since the incident with Tanya. It had started to feel hollow, like every brushstroke reminded her of everything that had fallen apart. But today was different. No expectations, no judgment, just paint. Darlene leaned in and glanced at Pamela's paper. "Nice lines. You've done this before." "A little," Pamela said quietly. "Well, don't be shy. We all started somewhere. I used to be a librarian, but now I spend more time bossing around watercolor paper than books." That made Pamela smile. It was the first time she'd laughed in weeks. As the session went on, she relaxed. Darlene chatted about her grandkids, her knee surgery, and the time she accidentally locked herself in the shed for 3 hours. Pamela listened, added a few comments, and let the soft background buzz of conversation wrap around her like a blanket. When she got home that afternoon, she set her finished painting on the kitchen counter. It wasn't perfect, but it felt honest. A row of daffodils under a pale blue sky. She hadn't expected much from the day, but it gave her something she hadn't felt in a while: lightness. Later that week, she saw a flyer near the front desk. "Volunteers needed. Senior literacy program." Pamela stared at it for a minute. Teaching wasn't something she'd done before, but she liked reading. And she wanted to feel useful again. Needed. She signed up. The following Tuesday, She was paired with a man named Henry who wanted help improving his reading so he could write letters to his granddaughter. Pamela read with him for half an hour, slowly going over sounds and phrases. He kept apologizing for messing up, but she just smiled and said, "We're not here to be perfect, just to practice." After the session, she passed by the community garden on her way out. Rows of leafy greens and flowers lined the beds. A man in a floppy hat and denim shirt was pulling weeds near the back. He looked up and nodded. "Afternoon." Pamela smiled back. "It's beautiful out here." "Leon," he said, offering his hand. "You should come by sometime. We're always looking for new hands." "I might," she said. "I grow flowers mostly. I'm not much for vegetables." Leon chuckled. "They both need care, that's all." Pamela started coming by the garden on Wednesdays. At first, she just watched. Leon showed her how to check the soil and water without overdoing it. He talked about tomatoes like they were pets, and it made her laugh. Slowly, they got to know each other. He was quiet, gentle, lost his wife 3 years ago, had 2 sons who lived out of state. No drama, no pressure. They shared stories while they planted. Nothing too personal at first, just light conversation. But it felt real, comfortable. One afternoon, after a garden session, Pamela sat on the bench by the flower beds and looked around. She wasn't just filling time anymore. She was part of something again. Art classes on Mondays, reading with Henry on Tuesdays, gardening on Wednesdays. Each activity brought a little bit of her back. Darlene invited her for coffee one Thursday, and they sat in a diner booth for over 2 hours, laughing about nothing in particular. Leon started saving a seat for her at the garden. Even Henry brought her a small plant from his yard as a thank you. It was all small stuff, simple, but it was the kind of simple that filled the space her family had left behind. Pamela still got the occasional text from Lacey or Vince, still saw Tanya's number pop up from time to time, but she didn't respond. She didn't feel the pull she once did. The guilt had loosened its grip. She hadn't replaced her old life. It was still a part of her, but now it was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. Each person she met at the center gave her something she hadn't realized she needed. Friendship without obligation, respect without strings. She was starting to see herself again, not as someone who had been fooled, not as someone to be pitied, but as someone who had survived and found her way forward. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon. Pamela had just finished watering her tulips when she heard the knock. It wasn't soft, it was steady, urgent. She looked through the front window and froze. Tanya. Behind her stood Vince, Lacey, and Hunter. They hadn't called. No text, no warning. Pamela's stomach tightened, but she opened the door. "Hi, Mom," Tanya said, trying to sound casual. Her voice didn't match the look on her face. Tight jaw, tense eyes. "Hello," Pamela replied calmly. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Tanya said. "Please." Pamela stepped back and let them in. No hugs, no greetings. Just the sound of footsteps on old wood floors. They all sat in the living room, but no one looked comfortable. Vince leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Lacey crossed her arms. Hunter kept staring at the floor. Pamela stayed standing. "I'm going to make this quick," Tanya began. "You've cut us off. You won't answer calls. You blocked our numbers. We didn't want to do this here, but you left us no choice." Pamela didn't flinch. "You mean I left you no way to control me?" Tanya frowned. "That's not fair." "You think what you said on that call was fair?" Pamela asked. "You forgot to hang up, Tanya. I heard everything." Silence. Lacey looked away. Vince rubbed the back of his neck. Tanya's mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. "You misunderstood," she started. "No," Pamela cut in. "Steady. I didn't. We were trying to help you," Tanya said finally. "You live alone. The house is too much. You're getting older. We thought, if we eased you into it, you'd see it was better for everyone." Pamela's eyes didn't move from hers. "You made plans behind my back, like I was already gone." Tanya stood up now too, matching her mother's height. We didn't want to upset you. We just thought it would be easier if you didn't tell me, Pamela finished. That's not easier, that's dishonest. Vince spoke next. Pamela, we weren't trying to hurt you, but you have to admit, this place is a lot. What if something happens? Who's here to help? Pamela turned to him. You're not concerned about me. You're concerned about what you think you're owed. He started to protest, but she raised a hand. No more money. No more access to my accounts. No more calls asking for help while pretending you're just checking in. The words hung heavy in the air. Lacey suddenly stood up, arms still crossed. So what? You're just cutting us out now? Over one mistake. One mistake? Pamela asked. You laughed. You joked about moving me out like I was some box you needed to get rid of. You called me gullible. That's not one mistake. We didn't mean it like that, Lacey said. But you said it, Pamela replied. Then Hunter looked up. His voice was quiet. Grandma, are you saying you don't want us in your life anymore? Pamela's throat tightened. She had always had a soft spot for Hunter. I want people in my life who treat me with honesty and respect, she said. If you can do that, the door's open. But I won't go back to being treated like I don't matter. Tanya stepped closer. Her voice cracked a little. You're throwing us away, Mom. No, Pamela said gently. I'm choosing myself. Vince looked frustrated. This doesn't make sense. We were trying to protect you. Pamela shook her head. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. She looked at each of them. Her daughter, her grandchildren, people she had loved deeply, raised, cared for, given everything to. But love without respect was just a trap with softer walls. Tanya's voice dropped. We just wanted what's best. Pamela's eyes softened, but her words stayed strong. What's best for me is not being managed like a burden. If you want to be in my life, you'll have to let me live it. Silence filled the room again. Finally, Vince stood. Come on, he muttered to the kids. We're not getting anywhere. Lacey gave Pamela one last glance. Confused, angry, and a little sad. Hunter whispered, I still love you, Grandma, before following the others out. Pamela walked them to the door, but didn't say another word. When the door shut, the house was quiet again, but not in the same way as before. She stood in the entryway, her hand resting on the doorknob. Her chest hurt. Her heart felt heavy. But beneath the sadness, there was something else. Relief. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't broken down. She had spoken plainly, held the line. And they had heard her. Whether they liked it or not, they knew now. She wasn't someone to be dismissed. She was still their mother, still their grandmother. But she was also a woman with boundaries. And she was done being walked over. She turned off the porch light, walked into the kitchen, and poured herself a glass of water. Her hand was steady. No regrets. Not this time. The sky was clear, and the breeze was gentle when Pamela stepped out onto the balcony of her new apartment. It had been nearly 4 months since she moved into Golden Pines, a quiet senior living community on the edge of Spokane. Her unit was on the 2nd floor, with a view of the walking path and the garden plots out back. Everything felt open and calm. No tension, no pretending, no heavy conversations she had to tiptoe around. This was her fresh start. She had worried at first that it would feel like giving up, leaving the home she had shared with Leonard, the rooms filled with memories. But it hadn't felt like giving up at all. It felt like finally choosing herself. Her new place had just the right amount of space, a cozy kitchen, a sunlit corner for her easel, and shelves lined with her favorite books. The management let her bring Myrtle too, and the cat had quickly made herself queen of the windowsill. Pamela now spent her mornings walking through the community garden, checking the progress of her marigolds and tomatoes. She liked running her fingers over the green leaves, smelling the soil, chatting with neighbors who stopped to admire the rows. Some days, she'd meet Leon there, already weeding or trimming back something. They'd started having lunch together every Tuesday. He was steady and kind, and he never asked questions she didn't want to answer. They talked about music, old movies, food, and books. Sometimes they didn't talk much at all, just sat in the sun and listened to the birds. In the afternoons, Pamela painted in the studio room next to the dining hall. She'd signed up to lead a watercolor class once a week, and to her surprise, 10 people showed up the first time. Most of them hadn't picked up a brush in decades, but they came, and they kept coming. They painted flowers and landscapes, holiday cards, and portraits of their dogs. They laughed, encouraged each other, and didn't worry about being perfect. It was the kind of joy that didn't need big explanations. It just was. One day, after a session, the center's program coordinator asked if she'd be willing to write something for the local paper. "Something about your story," she said. "What you've been through, how you got here." Pamela said yes, though she wasn't sure what to say at first. But when she sat down with a cup of tea and a quiet evening, the words came naturally. She didn't name names or point fingers. She just wrote what she had learned. That manipulation isn't always loud. That sometimes the people who say they care the most are the ones who take the most. And that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. She wrote about how older adults are often treated like they don't know what's best for them. How kindness gets mistaken for weakness. How saying no can be the first step toward peace. She ended it with a simple message. You are not alone. You are not foolish. And you deserve to live your life with dignity and choice. The essay was published 2 weeks later. Pamela didn't expect much from it, but the response was bigger than she imagined. Letters came in, emails, even a phone call from a woman in Idaho who had read the piece and said, "I thought I was the only one." Pamela smiled when she hung up the phone. She had once felt that way too, alone, embarrassed, unsure if she was overreacting. Now she knew better. The calls from her family had finally stopped. Tanya had left a voicemail a few weeks back, saying she was ready to talk if you are. Pamela hadn't called her back. Not yet, maybe not ever. She still loved her daughter. That hadn't changed. But love, she'd learned, wasn't enough to excuse everything. Love needed to be honest. It needed to be mutual. And it needed to come without a price tag. That Saturday morning, Pamela pulled on her sun hat, slipped her gardening gloves into her bag, and walked outside. The sun was warm on her shoulders as she headed down the path toward the garden. Leon was already there, waving from the far end. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. They walked side by side between the rows, stopping to check on the squash blossoms and the lavender bush that had grown surprisingly fast this season. "Looks like we'll need to trim that back soon," Leon said, pointing. Pamela nodded. "We've still got time." She looked around, at the flowers, the breeze moving through the trees, the people talking and smiling and simply being. This wasn't the life she thought she'd have at 78. In many ways, it was better. She was still healing, still building, but she felt whole again and free. She turned to Leon and smiled. "Want to help me plant a few more marigolds?" "Wouldn't miss it," he said. They walked to her plot together, sun warming their backs, soil soft and ready beneath their feet. Pamela bent down, pressing her fingers into the dirt with steady hands. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but today was hers, and that was enough. If Pamela's story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need it too. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself, even when it was hard? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories of strength, healing, and starting over. Thank you for watching, and remember, you have the right to live your life with peace, purpose, and pride.